Hi, folks. Welcome to the final Take on Board event for 2025 because where is 2025 disappearing in a puff of smoke? So lovely to see you all. Today we are talking about nature in the boardroom. Before we get started, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. For me, I am on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and any First Nations people that we may have here today. As I'm sure all of you know, I support Voice, Treaty and Truth for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia, and I encourage others to do the same. And on that, in the state of Victoria, for those of you that are here in Victoria, it is so awesome to see that we now have a treaty 200 and something years too late, but still, it is the first treaty in Australia and it's bloody awesome. That is a technical term, so it is awesome to see. All right, folks, with that, I would actually love to hear, folks, can you pop over in the chat where you're today? It'd be great if you know both the traditional owners or the First Nations name of where you are, as well as maybe the more commonplace name. It'd be lovely to just pop it over in the chat about where you're logging in from today. Jess is on Wurundjeri country as well, as is Jocelyn. We'll probably have a few on Wurundjeri country. So yeah, if you can pop that over in the chat, that would be great. So I'm just waiting for it all. Yep. Wurundjeri in Nam, Yalat. Oh, you'll say this better for me later, Dominique. I'll leave it with you. Ghana country in Adelaide. I'll be heading there in a couple of weeks. Welcome, Sally. Excellent. And Briar's down by the Merry Creek, as am I. Zurich in Switzerland. That is, I'm not sure who the traditional owners would be there, Boriana, where that's a whole different conversation. All right. Folks, my name's Helga Svensson. I am the host of the Take On Board podcast, the connector in chief of the Take On Board community. And I host these events, I host the podcast, I run the programs because I love bringing good women together, geeking out about governance. So it is awesome to have you all here this morning. We love Dominique here at
Frequent
Take On
flyer.
Board. She is definitely a frequent flyer and we love it. So, Dominique, I'm not going to read all of the bio there because it's all there and she is awesome. Knows an enormous amount about all sorts of incredible things. And as I'm sure you all know, sits as nature in the boardroom for Regen Australia. So today she is going to share some of her experience and wisdom, and then we'll have an opportunity to have Q&A. I will pop over in the chat because if people, we will do a bit of this afterwards, but if people are thinking of
This
questions,
is
I'm just going to pop you on mute, Susan. Um, so if people think of questions as you go, either jot them down or feel free to pop them straight into Slido. Once we've heard from Dominique, Dominique's going to present for 15, 20 minutes. After we've heard from her, there will be another breakout room. You'll get to meet some different people. Think about the questions, pop them in Slido, and then we will come back for Q&A. So with that, Dominique, I'm just going to pass to you. You've got 15, 20 minutes to fill us in on this. What is this nature in the boardroom? Dominique, over to you.
if I can get you to give me a 5-minute warning.
Yeah, I'll probably break in because sometimes people don't see
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But
do that. Yeah, do that. Yeah,
awesome.
or just yell. Thanks for the invitation to speak. As I was telling my little pop-out group before, I'm hoping this is going to be the first of 3 conversations. So this is the first conversation sort of introducing the concept and what I'm doing in it and what others are doing in the area. And next year, I'm having some meetings with the lawyers to set up the legal framework of what this could look like for Australia. It's been done for the UK, but not for Australia. So that will be next year's. And then I'm hoping the following year, I might have a few pilot organisations that I will have worked with to trial what it means for them and what impact it has. That's the long-term plan, and this is year 1. So I'd just like to add to your acknowledgement, your beautiful acknowledgement, Helia, which is, we get welcomed with Woman Jekka by the original custodians, and that means come with purpose. And I think as far as board members go, coming with purpose is exactly what we're all about. The purpose of the organisation, the purpose of why we're here, and my purpose, as was in my little group, was that I've always felt solace and a love for nature, and I'd like to be part of making sure that my daughter and her children and future generations are also able to enjoy nature and be part of nature and feel connection. So I come with that purpose. So where did it come from? So in 2022 in the UK, a group called Faith in Nature, which is a manufacturing company, they make soaps and shampoos and things, decided to bring nature into their boardroom as a director. And they used the model of, when you're a parent and you're looking after a child under 18, then you have that role for looking after them. So it's a legal framework, so you can make decisions. They're not old enough to make legal decisions, and so they're using um, the same words. So instead of being guardian for a child, you're guardian for nature, and so that's the director's role, and it's how they're brought it in. And since doing that, they've developed with some lawyers in the UK, they've developed a toolkit. They're bringing out a book next year and they've worked, there's about 26 organisations internationally now that have brought nature into their governance process under different models. So I'll share some of that today. The other thing that's been happening in parallel is that we had the task force for carbon disclosure that's come through. And we're also getting the nature equivalent of that. So that's an international initiative to look at how do businesses disclose their carbon risks and their nature risks. And here in Australia, we have aligned how that's going to happen for carbon with how that's happening in nature. And there's been quite a push to pilot what that could look like for different industries. And so, and that's called people throw the acronym TNFD. It stands for Task Force for Nature Related Financial Disclosures. And there's a huge document on that and all of the requirements coming down the line for particularly the larger organisations to start with. But at the real core of that is we realise that our businesses are all reliant on the environment. So whether you're a food manufacturer or whether you're an electrical power producer or whether you're a school that has buildings on a site, everything is dependent on a healthy and vibrant and vital environment. And so if we understand what our risks are within that environment, so if we're an energy producer, then obviously, and we use coal, then coal and its impact on the environment and the excess coal could be one of those risks. So it's identifying what those risks are. That's brought together with the financial instruments, so they're a disclosure to the market because shareholders want to understand the risks that they're undertaking when they're investing in a particular company. So that's kind of the framework that that's coming under. And just really briefly under the TNFD, and by the way, I've summarised this into a 2-page handout, which Helia will send round at the end. So I see Jessica writing notes, but you'll receive this information along with a whole bunch of links and so as well. But anyway, under the TNFD, they start with the things that make sense, like understand your risks, understand your impacts, understand how you need to manage those, what metrics and what targets you need in place to minimise the risk of whatever your organisation is at risk of. There's no coal, there's no power, sort of thing. So managing those kinds of things. But then there's 2 higher elements within the TNFD that they want disclosure on. And one of those is, what does this mean for strategy? So it's not only you understand what your risks and your vulnerabilities are for your organisation within nature, then how is that being brought through into your strategy? And then at an even higher level, what is it meaning for your governance? So in the reporting for the TNFD, they want evidence of what are your risks? How have you identified them? How are you minimising them? What are you doing to offset them? So what positive impacts are you trying to create to shore up that system? They want to know, what that means for your strategy. So how does it go through your strategy? And then how is that brought into your governance processes? And so there's what's been happening in the UK as far as bringing nature onto the boardroom Even Apple had an advert. I don't know if people have seen the Apple advert where they bring nature onto the board. I think there's a link to that in the handout that you'll receive. So people are really starting to think about that. So there's the Trust for Nature, sorry, the TNFD, and then there is the Faith in Nature, um, kind of moving things along, particularly from the European perspective, and in Australia, that alignment with the carbon reporting. The wonderful Daria, who's on this call and hopefully will be doing a pod with Helia next year, has worked with the AICD on a survey on where are organisations in Australia at as far as nature and their literacy, as far as bringing nature risks and disclosures into their business. So they had a response from about 250 people. And that, again, the link is in the handout that you'll get sent, but maybe, Daria, you can put it in the chat as well for people, or somebody can. But that is a great report. It just came out last week or the week before that, talking to a whole bunch of real people doing this in different ways. And I won't go into the outcomes of that because Daria will do that with Helia next year, but it's a great read. And it shows that it is an evolving and emerging sector, which is why it's fun to be talking to you all about it today. So in looking at the 26 organisations around the world that have brought nature into governance, there are various models. So as I said before, Faith in Nature brought nature onto the board as a director with a role as a custodian, not music custodian, as the guardian for nature. Myself, I'm on the board of Regen Melbourne, and my role is the voice of nature. So we consciously chose a different approach. So rather than being a guardian over, we thought a voice with created a better dynamic, a better inclusionary dynamic within the board. But that's the particular model of nature as a director. So that's the first model that's emerging throughout those various organisations around the world. And those organisations, about half of them are private and listed companies, and about half of them are institutional, not-for-profit organisations that are doing education and so forth. So there's arts, so there's a mixture of about half and half. Yeah, the second model is nature as inspiration. So this is where you're using nature as more of a model. You're basing your business decisions on ecological thinking and models and systems thinking and so forth. So that's as an inspiration, and that tends to come through in your purpose statement or things like that. So it tends to feed into that aspirational level. And there's nature as advisor, and now an advisor can be formal or informal. So it could be an advisory group that's working with your organisation to set the foundations of what nature looks like for that organisation. Or it can be a person that you appoint and it's a consultant to help the organisation. So that's another level of that. And then finally, there's nature as shareholder. So there are organisations that, and again in the handout, there's links to these, but there are organisations that have nature as the golden shareholder. And so it means that in certain contexts, nature can have a veto voice, as the golden shareholder model does. And so these are all the different models. In fact, there's a couple of organisations that have gone so far as to bring nature in as a CEO, and all of these things seem. How does nature sit there and have a conversation? And so I was very curious about that. What does it look like in real life? Because it's fine to say these words, but how do you do it? What are the consequences? What are the impacts? How does it improve our governance processes? And so in 2024, in October, Regen Melbourne, the CEO rang me up and said, Dominique, would you be interested in being the voice of nature on our board, to join our board as nature for a year or so, just so we can test that out, what that would look like? And I said, yes, I am interested, but not in a year, because I think it's a process that needs to be developed in a co-learning environment over time. And so I agreed to join the board for 3 years. and officially was, so I was an observer in December and officially started in February at the February board meeting this year. And my process there, I should have said, given you some of my background actually, I was an academic for 20 years at RMIT University and at Melbourne University. My degrees are in science botany, so there's my nature love, engineering, cleaner production, how do we work with industry to do better production processes, then a PhD in architecture, and then I've done some postgrad around governance. And so I bring a research mindset to these sorts of things. And so we're doing what's called a participatory action research project, which means that I work with the board and the exec to determine how we do the research. We do reflections, everyone contributes. There's an ongoing building of knowledge so that we can track the impact, but also track that different people experience things in different ways. So something that I can observe and think, oh yeah, well that X equals Y equals Z. That's how I see it. Somebody else might say, no, no, that's not how it worked. And so that way we're getting a richer conversation around the consequences of having the voice of nature on board. So I'm documenting all of that. When I read the papers, I read it with, this is the pragmatics of it, I read it with my fiduciary hat, because at the end of the day, I do have those requirements. So I read it as that, and then I change my hat to my green hat, and then I read it. Usually go for a walk or go in the garden or something, and then read it as the voice of nature. And interestingly enough, if we have time, maybe in the questions, I can give you an example of how I was completely blown away by an insight that I had by doing that I hadn't expected. And it's around our risk register, so we can talk about that later. The other thing that I have is I have 8 critical friends. So Helly is one of them that I meet with regularly, and I share how we're going and what it's looking like. And they're from all different industries. And the reason is that I want to be able to communicate effectively to all levels. So not just, the not-for-profits, greenies, but also to the people that have been in C-suites for, decades. I want to make sure that it's relevant and effective and supportive of a narrative for them of what it could mean for their organisation. As I said, it's a 3-year process. So this year was all about exploring what it looked like in practice. Next year, I'll be working hopefully with a legal firm that I'm meeting with next week to develop what the legal frameworks would look like and have some comments around that. And Daria, maybe you and I should have a catch up around that. And then the following year, I'm hoping to do some more of this with some pilot organisations so that we can test what that looks like. So lastly, in the handout, there is the UK firm. I'm just looking at my notes. The UK firm that has developed the legals for the UK. There's another organisation, again, the link's in there, that's developed what it looks like in the Netherlands and in Belgium. And in France. So there's legal frameworks for all of those countries for how to do this. The one in UK is Stevens and Bolton. And again, the link is in that handout. The reasons that those 26 companies give for putting nature on the board is that it gives them enhanced strategic foresight, cultural enrichment, and I'm reading this, so that's why innovation and business models. So there's been some new products developed, new partnerships developed, and some of those stories are really wonderful to read. And it's about authenticity. It's addressing that greenwash question. So those are the things that the organisations talk about. And within the handout, there is a step-by-step for you. 5 minutes, that's all right, I'm almost done. So that leaves us more time for conversation and questions. But there's a step-by-step, and that is start with the why. Why would your organisation want to bring it to nature? If it's just a compliance process for now, because you've got a whole lot of other things going, understand that has implications. If it's just a compliance mindset, it puts additional pressure on the organisation. So have those initial conversations about clarity of intent. Select which model. Is it as advisor? Is it as director? Is it as shareholder? Is it as whatever the fourth one is that I've now lost? Menopause, hey? Amend your governance documents. So once you've identified your model, then it needs to have implications to all of your documents, your objects, your clauses, all of those sorts of things. Appoint who it is in that model and how to support them, because there are reporting processes that all need to be in place. There are consultative reporting that needs to be in place, all of that. It's establish a reflection mechanism because this is a learning thing. And rather than, again, making it compliance, you have to, if you take it at that strategic learning, how does this improve our organisation? Then having that reflection loop and holding how you do it lightly to start with is really important. And then lastly, communicate. So share how you're doing it, link with others how to do it. So really, that's my story. Next year, hopefully, I'll be here with maybe whoever I'm working with legally to present what that could look like. And then the following year, I hope that we'll have some pilots and we can really test. And in the questions, I can unpack if people are interested. Some examples of the implications it's had at Regen Melbourne to have me as the voice of nature on the board. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dominique. Amazing. Oh, folks,
I'm
okay.
just going to cough.
It- Nature on the boardroom can cough as well. It's allowed to have ups and downs. So, folks, I'm watching faces as that was happening, and I'm guessing minds are buzzing. So, what I'm going to do is pop you in a breakout room. You will likely be with different people, but also Zoom random sometimes. Anyway, Zoom random will choose who Zoom random chooses. So, I'm going to pop you in a breakout room with one or two other people. I can just hear somebody left. So just making sure that all works out. Yes, it does. Good. Right. So I will, and I can see some people have already started putting questions in the chat. Love your work. That is brilliant. So again, just a reminder, use Slido and upvote questions, and the handout that Dominique talked about is over in the chat as well. So I'm going to pop you in a breakout room, talk about what you just heard, pop questions in Slido, keep an eye on that. So if other people are putting questions in there, just upvote it. When you come back, you're going to have till about 20 past the hour. Oh, we've got Adelaide here. It's not, you'll work it out. So you'll have about 8 minutes. And to have a chat to people in the breakout room, to do your processing, to pop your questions in. And when you come back, we'll have about 20, 25 minutes for questions as well. For this one, Dominique, if you could stay in the main room, that would be awesome. Any questions before I open the breakout rooms? All right. Where are we? There we are. Rooms are open. We'll see you back in 7 or 8 minutes for question time, because they'll literally be here in 2 seconds. By the time I've said that, people will be back. Here we are. Welcome back, folks. Feel free. So, thanks for questions in Slido. And if, as we're having this conversation, more questions come up, please feel free to keep using Slido. It's a live one, and feel free to upvote or some of those questions as well, because we will do them in the order that they appear. So here's how Q&A works at these events. If there's a name against it, I will ask that person very briefly introduce themselves and ask their question, and just so we get to hear from some of you as well. So Boriana, where are you on my screen? There you are. You're top of the pops for this one. So can I ask you to briefly introduce yourself and ask your question?
Everyone, I'm the one in Europe. I heard Dominic talk a lot about Europe and UK legislation. I come from marketing, executional excellence, and digital transformation with pharmaceutical companies. And my question was to Dominic, what are some companies that are leading the way with nature in the boardroom? And can you think of like an inspirational example that you would like to share with us about one of them? Thank you.
Great question. And here's something I prepared earlier. So in the links, you'll have this paper. Can I just check that people can see the paper? Yeah. And within that paper, Brianna, if I can make it go forward, they talk about nature as inspiration, and then they give some examples of organizations over here, and they give examples of what that looks like. They talk about nature as an advisor and 3 different ways of doing that. And again, they give case studies for each. They talk about nature as director, and they give, this is an example that I wanted to bring out. It's a water authority in the Netherlands. That water authority is in the northwest of the Netherlands, and a lot of its water is based on water that comes through the sand dunes and so forth. And so looking after those sand dunes, and that sand dune being coming into the boardroom and having a voice is really important. But the way that they've done this is as an executive, not as a non-executive. So this is actually part of the exec. There's somebody that's in charge of nature and community. And it's interesting that they've brought those 2 things together. Then there's nature director, other options, and then they talk as shareholders, various ways that a shareholder, and again, they give examples. So I just wanted to say that paper has got some of those answers. Because I've been talking to a water authority about what this looks like, I looked in more depth than that.
Awesome. Thanks, Dominique. Thanks, Mariana, for your question as well. So there is loads. Yeah, loads. I find it interesting actually that there is so much happening. It's a relatively new space, but there is a lot happening. Who's up next? Alicia, if you could, there you are. Briefly introduce yourself, say your name, introduce yourself, and then ask your question.
Oh, thanks, Helia, and thanks, Dominique. It's great to have your presentation. So everyone, my name's Alicia Rathbone, and I'm here because I've known Helia for years and love the network and connecting with people, so it's been great. So yeah, I was just really keen when you were speaking, Dominique, when you talked about the 2 hats that you wear. I loved that. Like, I read it with my board and the fiduciary duties and think about that. Then I go outside, experience nature, and read it with the other one. I was just wondering if you could share anything that's emerged for you through doing that practice. I just think that's really great, because for me, I'm trying to use, I do use nature as part of my sense making. So I thought that was really interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, look, and this happened right at the beginning. So we were meeting around one of the aspects was our risk register, and looking at the risk register and thinking about, are we covering all the risks that we have and so forth. And so I read it with my Dominique hat on, and it was like, do I agree that the risks are there? Do I agree with their ratings? Are there policies in place? Are there responsible people? Yeah, so tick, tick. Top one was environment. Under environment, the first in alphabetical was carbon. And so reduce carbon, CEOs ultimately responsible. Okay, cool. Put that to one side. No issues about, there weren't any other risks that I could think of. Came back with my green hat on, started reading it, thinking that it was just a risk register, is boring, I'm not going to have any new thoughts. And nature said, I don't care about carbon. I was like, and then I unpacked that. It's that, well, Regen Melbourne is about connecting people to their places and creating regenerative approaches, which is how can people really fall in love with their place, their country, their community, and act in such a way as to create a more resilient, thriving, vibrant future. So how do we do that? Well, we can't do that. The strategies were, in the risk matrix, were reduce travel, do more online. And nature was like, but your purpose for why you're here is to connect people to country, in place, and to create those conversations together. You need to not think about minimization. You need to think about, you're investing that carbon. You need to invest that carbon consciously to enable the outcome that your organization is for. I had not had that thought before. It's a completely new thought. And in unpacking that, hey, I don't care about carbon. Obviously, nature does care about carbon, but it was that thought just stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, okay, now I need to spend some time understanding that. So that's an example. Does that make sense, Alicia?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's uncovered a whole other way of thinking about things, but it completely flips for the organisation. That different lens they were taking to minimisation to being about, let's amplify our impact of using carbon. Yeah.
Well, and it's meant that we look at the whole risk register differently now. So it's no longer about looking at the risk register as from a minimisation lens. It is as an understanding of what that risk is, consciously investing that risk for what outcome. So it's really changed. I guess it's the difference between compliance and governance, right? It's shifted the mindset just by having that thought process. So that's an example. There are many, and I was speaking at an event that Francie, who's with us here, was organising Governance for Good program with Small Giants program, and at that, we have the chair there, and the chair reflected on her experience. And so, again, this is a co-created outcome. It's not me. And for her, she's really seen, because I don't know what the board was like before, she's seen that there's been an elevation in the conversation. And I would, in that, just having greater diversity. You have greater diversity around the boardroom, you have better conversations. Your organisation becomes more robust because you are having those better conversations from different perspectives, and nature is sitting there. And one of the other questions which I really like, and I have my presentation up, I can now see the Slido, was in that vein of representation and different voices enabling better decision making. I know that future generations and young people, to other voices that people are starting to bring into the boardroom, just as they're bringing lived experience into the boardroom. And I was mentioning that I was nature on the board to one of my students, and they said, "Oh, remember back in 2015, you were teaching about bringing a teddy bear to your board meetings." And I was like, "I'd forgotten about that." And that was how we were representing then the young generation. We were bringing a teddy bear, and they had a seat at the table. And so just that presence of those different voices seemed to mean that you're bringing in a wider range of perspectives to decision making.
Nice. Thank you. The next question in the list is about background and experience. It says anonymous, but it must be somebody here.
It was me.
Okay, Kat,
thank
you.
Why I was anonymous. I didn't request it to be.
That's all right. So, Kat, I'll get you to say your name, briefly introduce yourself, and ask your question. Kat, over to you.
I'm Kat, co-founder of Pony Up for Good. Marty, the other half of Pony Up, chatted and sort of introduced. We're a social enterprise in the sustainability space. And I just wanted to follow on a little bit sort of from what Alicia was talking about before around if you've got two hats and one of them is there as nature, what are the other complementary hats that might add value, whether it's sort of like a risk and reputation kind of hat or a legal hat or a, are there other hats that you've seen done really well that add value to that thinking?
Yeah. So the teddy bear is an example. Interestingly, though, because because we've come at it from a voice of nature as opposed to the guardianship model, what we've found is that it's not my hat. The hat comes to the meeting, and yes, I read the board papers with that hat on, and I consciously make that decision. But other people can pick up the hat and say, and from my reflection, I went for a walk and I was thinking about this paper, and so we were having some tricky discussions around. Sorry, I'm slightly diverting from your question, but we were having some funding conversations around funding and being a not-for-profit and the way the world is, the political and economic things are hard. And the person had a reflection that led to some conversations that led to some models that supported an approach which has now really secured the foundation of the organisation for the next 5 years. I mean, that was all evolving anyway. I always feel like somebody ends up being the hero, but it's not that. It's actually how you talk together and come through for that. And they, that was for them walking it, and they brought that perspective in. So, and I think that was one of the big changes, because when I first came in as the voice of nature, there were a couple of board members that were like, well, I love nature too, and I want to be the voice of nature. And so we had to have that conversation around this is a capability and a presence in the room. It's not, I'm as biased as any other person, so it doesn't mean what I say is law. It's like that's why the voice is important, because it's a conversation together. Yeah, so as far as Region Melbourne goes, the only other hats we bring in are the normal, like we have expertise around the table, whether they're ecologists or people that plan things, that people that are lawyers, people that are accountants. So we just have, sorry, I was talking about Greenfleet. At Region Melbourne, we have people that are good at raising money, and people that work in communities, and people in the food world. So we bring those. We haven't consciously thought of other hats. I think we've been focusing on this one, but I love that idea. And my student reminding me of the teddy bear.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a nice Christmas conversation for us to have.
Nice. Thanks, Dominique. It sounds like then I'm just going to dovetail on that, and maybe because you touched on that as well, but it sounds like then for nature, whichever way nature is in the boardroom, that some skills around, it's almost not a technical thing. It's around being able to facilitate the conversation and ask the good questions and prompt the other people in the boardroom to be able to recognize nature. How's that landing for you, Dominique? Is that like, what are the attributes that nature, if as you say, if everybody wants to be nature in the boardroom, because I'm sure I want to be nature in the boardroom, because if people are representing nature in the boardroom, what are the attributes that the right people have to represent nature in the boardroom?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to that. So there are how you set it up. So what's the purpose of nature and how you set it up. So what's going to be the reporting, who's going to be the exec that works with you, what are the, so there's that side of things. And I think that fits well within person, and that they don't necessarily need to have ecological knowledge. I think having some ecological training potentially is useful, but you could say systems thinking is an ecological approach, right? And you wouldn't call that a nature, but it is how nature works. It works in systems. It's not isolated. It's so I think it's some of those which we're getting to as we improving our, moving out of the industrial age to the future age. We're getting that sense of the way we were doing it before isn't the right way. There is more to it. What is that more? Well, it is that systems thinking. It is that ecological thinking. It is that bringing in of multiple voices. It is that. Nice. So I think it's the skills, that curiosity potentially as well. I think holding space is important. So it's both the soft skills and those, how do we bring that into the business from a reporting? Because there are fiduciary duties that will come along with the TNFD. It also needs to be taken care of. So
great, thank you.
I know that some of the organisations in the handout, that if you go into them, they have appointed either a local ecological NGO onto their board, or in fact, Boreana, I think the Faith in Nature started from their marketing people, brought that to, but they're the ones that drove that, and they're the ones that are driving it. So I think it can come from various ways.
Nice. Excellent. Thank you. Hilary, you're up next. If you could say your name, briefly introduce yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Hilary Sinis, up far north New South Wales in the rainforest. I work at Salesforce at the moment, looking for entry-level roles in boards. It's part of my transition out of corporate life. Well, change of whatever, doesn't matter. Okay, my topic is, so I'm an AI specialist, God help me, after a long illustrious career as a human-centered designer. So loving what you're saying, Dominique, about systems thinking and curiosity and facilitation. It's all very much what I do day to day. It's really cool. What I'm hearing, which gives me a cold chill, but what you've done is help me become less narrow-minded about it. AI as a board member freaks me out, right? So complete opposite end of the spectrum as nature on the board, or nature having a voice from nature. But I was wondering if anybody else has, or yourself, any other kinds of abstractions. You mentioned the teddy bear, but your description of this is helping me understand what that means. And I would love to know, the big question with AI is accountability, right? So obviously you're not saying that there's an accountability attachment to nature having a voice, but I'm curious about just want to hear other examples if they're around this type of thing. Although I'm getting
I'd love a longer conversation around AI. I know Francie and I had a conversation around AI, and for me, everything's nature, right? AI we've developed, and it is a tool that has come out of how we interact with the world and how we think and the models that we've created. So it could be argued that that's natural, that's nature. But for what purpose? And so I think that's just like the carbon story. It's how do we use AI in such a way that it is conscious of its impact and its weaknesses and supports capacity to create the outcomes that our organisation is designed for.
Yeah.
So for me, AI, I don't see AI as much as I see it more as a tool rather than as a presence. So without AI existing, we could still grow food and breathe and have water. Whereas I find nature is more of a fundamental. If we stuff it up, we're stuffed. Whereas AI would be really disastrous. We can still go out and grow food and breathe air and so forth. So I think there's a different level of bringing them on board.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say that they're similar at all. I think they're wildly different. So this is a fascinating topic of having a resource or an environment, a non-human, abstracted into the room. So yeah, if there's any other examples that are around.
Yeah, I don't know of any other than the teddy bear, as I mentioned, and some people bring a plant in, but that's nature rather than being a person.
Right.
But the thing is, right, we've created this social cultural world. Law, education, our government system, money, it's all stuff we've created. We've made it up. And therefore it needs our filter to engage with nature to speak for it, because plant being there instead of talk like a plant, it's like water please, sunlight please, and so forth, doesn't understand finance and legals and so forth. And so it needs a person. So even the teddy bear potentially needs a person to speak for it. It's like the guardianship for a child, I guess. Yeah, so I don't know of any other abstractions, but I do feel like just a plant on a desk will give you some of it, but won't give you the aha around the risk register and how that could be approached differently.
Nice. Thanks, Hilary. Thanks, Dominique. Jess, you're up next. If you can say your name, briefly introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thanks, Helia. Hi, I'm Jess Cheers. I lead treaty readiness in a Victorian state government infrastructure agency. And I'm here to I think there are a lot of parallels, although sustainability initiatives in the boardroom are far more advanced, but there are a lot of parallels and lessons that I'm here and like many love and am informed by nature in my life. Dom, I was really keen to hear a little bit more, or if you could expand on your comment you make about how you speak to different people to help inform your communication to different audiences. This is something that I think about a lot when talking to my board, and I try to anticipate different questions and interests. But could you expand on that comment about how you get advice to support that?
Yeah, so I have a couple of ecologists, a couple of board people, a couple of CEOs, and a couple of people that have been in the corporate world for a really long time, and a couple of lawyers. They only add up to 8, so a couple out of 5 makes 10. But anyway, you know what I mean. Some of the lawyers are on boards, so the different conversations I've had are the ecologists wanting to see how it's being measured and how what that's meaning into on-ground ecological changes. The board people are like, what are the legal frameworks? How does this work? How do you make decisions? Who votes? How do you hold someone accountable if their nature, there's all those sorts of questions. The most interesting conversation I had was someone who's been in the C-suite for and has been CEO of many organisations and really huge ASX boards said to me, isn't it just a component of good sustainability? So that pushback of, isn't this just what good sustainability does? Isn't this just what a good ESG strategy does? Isn't this just what you have in your risk register? And that I found that really confronting and really interesting, because obviously at that point, 6 months ago, I wasn't communicating the capacity to improve the governance and the decision making and the outcomes of the organisation clearly enough. So that's kind of how I was using that. I'm using those conversations to see, is this resonating with you? If it's not resonating, why is it not resonating? And how do I then bring a better way of presenting this? Now, realistically, there are a lot of boards that already feel under the pressure about all the changes that are happening so quickly, and how much they're already doing. There's a lot of execs already feeling out under a lot of pressure because of the amount of reporting, plus all of the other economic constraints and political constraints that we're under at the moment, and the shift in generosity. I don't know if that makes sense, but it feels like there is this sense of having to make people behave rather than trusting them to behave, and therefore people have to do a lot more reporting and justify themselves a lot more. And so I think for that particular person, it's like, not another thing, please. Like just let us survive this time of change before we do new things. And so that's really interesting to be able, and really good on the person for sitting with me and being able and happy to unpack things in a good way. So yeah, so it's interesting. That's why I'm doing it, so that I can have those different conversations and provide different ways in, different stories and different capacities. And I think part of it, as Boriana asked, is like, what are the key examples of organisations that are doing it? And I think collecting those case studies and so forth is so critical, so that if you're talking to a water authority, you can say, hey, here's the water authority that's doing it. If you're talking to a state government, the state government in Wales, one of their the development organisation there has brought nature onto their board. They've got a nature commissioner. And if you're talking to a chocolate factory, you can talk about Tony Chocolonely, and so forth. And so collecting those stories, I think, is part of speaking to different audiences.
Great. Thank you.
Hopefully having the legals sorted out next year will also help people feel comfortable about what that looks like.
Nice. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Dominique. Kate, your one's up next. I think it in some ways relates to what we've just heard. Kate, are you there? Yep, there we go. The magic coming off camera, coming off mute, so we know the person's there. So, Kate, could you say your name, briefly introduce yourself, and ask your question?
So yes, we're starting to repeat ourselves in a wonderfully useful way, affirming way. Thank you so much, Dominique. I'm Kate. I'm a governance nerd and consultant, and have been on the Take on Board podcast a couple of times. I work with a lot of organizations, and it's been really interesting and depressing to map the preoccupations of the sector over the last couple of years, which, but pre-pandemic were very much increasing levels of environmental panic. And then since COVID and the poly crisis we're now on, I quite often get to the end of conversations before organizations go, oh yes, and the environment. So it's both understandable when so many are in deep financial panic and existential crisis, especially in the small to medium for purpose sector, but incredibly frustrating, because if you don't have breathable air, then none of your other business plans are going to come off as well. So I'm just wondering if you've seen any examples of campaigns or calls to action to get that higher up the to-do list, I guess.
Yeah, Jessica and our little group talked about that, nature being on the board seeming a way to bring it up higher. I think the TNFD we'll bring that in and the way that that is structured, and that's still on track to be brought in as much as, but that's aimed at very large organisations. But the thing is, when you aim at really large organisations, those large organisations then ask their little organisations to report up, and so it creates a ripple down. For the not-for-profit world, I think that for me, so there's 3 or 4 different not-for-profits that I've had the same conversation with, that if you look at an ecosystem, and if an ecosystem is under stress, it drops limbs, the leaves aren't as big, they might go down, and then when the water comes up, they come back up. They tend to focus on the things, their stability, that just like when we're really cold, we might get frostbite in our fingers, but our heart will keep pumping. So with those organisations, we've worked on a strategy of how do we go deeper, build that foundation so that when it rains, it will come back. And so we've used nature as a bit of a model for, and foundation relates to stress as a way of unlocking how do we ensure that we survive and stabilise, so that, and part of that, again, us being social, cultural, we've made up the world that we live in. The reality is nature. Trying to bring back your purpose, the stuff that you've made up, back to the nature. So, if you're working in children's health, then this being connected to nature is a really critical whole biophilia thing, and how it works with kids is really important. And so trying to bring that way, which is why it's so important to start with, what is our why? Why are we doing this, bringing nature to the board? Why are we having these conversations? And I try and do that through whatever is causing the stress. Let's review that stress and what can we learn from nature as a model. There's a great website called Ask Nature. It's got like 100,000 or more examples of questions that people have asked. They tend to be more like, how do I design a better coffee cup, or how do I design a better swimsuit, or better train, those sorts of questions. But there are some model questions. The reality is that for a very, very long time, nature's been an externality. And I know when I was involved in Daria's research for the AICD, they said, so what would be your key message to boards on how to start? I'd say, look at what you call your externalities, because that's probably where your nature risk is. And so part of it is building that foundation of knowledge, of understanding there is a risk there, and that we have been discounting it because it's hard to quantify, it's hard to look out. We're often extracting from it. And so how do we have that conversation of how do we extract from it, but ensure that we give more back than we take? And to be honest, there's so much to learn from our Indigenous custodians on how to do that, which we could learn from and move forward with.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Dominique. Dominique, I think that finishes our questions. The other one was about your role, and I think you've covered that off. So join me in thanking Dominique for providing just, oh my gosh, so much food for thought. I don't think you've told us all we need to know about nature in the boardroom, because how on earth do we know everything there is to know about nature in the boardroom? And you've got a 3-year experiment to learn more about it. So I'm so glad to be, one of the partners on your journey along this, and to bring the Take On Board community into that as well. It's already prompted all sorts of interesting things in my brain. So yeah, I've seen lots of hearts and claps, but yay, thank you. Join me in thanking Dominique for all of her incredible wisdom.
Thank you all. And on LinkedIn, I do share nature on the board updates as I find new organisations, as there's new publications, as there's new videos from people. Follow me on LinkedIn, and I do. And if you come across anything, please share it back to me, because it's part of a co-creation.
Before we close out, we've got less than a minute to go. Could people just pop over in the chat one word that sums up the conversation that we've had today? I would love to hear that. So if people could pop that over in the chat, that would be awesome. While you're doing that, I will again thank Dominique for being here, and I will just pop in. For those that are on boards, the Take On Board Accelerator program is now open for 2026, so it might be something that you were interested in. There'll be some info to come. All right, look at this. Oh my God, I can't keep up. I have to scroll up the thing. Energizing, provoking, biophilia, love that. Teddy bear, thought-provoking, go women's networks, love, insightful, connection, inspiring, thought-provoking community, polycrisis, nurture. Oh, I love that as well. Oh, thank you, folks. Wonderful and fascinating. Just to add that over there. There is nothing I love more than spending the morning with the Take On Board community. Thank you so much for being here. This conversation will also appear on the podcast next week if you missed any part of it, and you will get an email with all of the follow-up stuff. Thank you again, Dominique. You are a rock star and a superstar and all of the other types of stars. And I will see you around the community in some way, shape or form to everybody here. Love your work. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.